Good evening. Every year, or almost every year, as you move around town, you pass campaign signs in people's yards and along streets all over the city. And in 2009, I was one of those yard signs. My hopes and ideas and passions staked into the grass all over town. My name is Amir Farokhi, and the story I'm going to share with you tonight is about running for public office and losing. And my story doesn't have great scandal or drama. There's no epic gaffe or embarrassment. As failures go, it's incredibly common. It happens thousands of times a year in this country and all over the world. But it was a failure that caught me off guard, left me disoriented, and really questioning who I was and what my purpose was. In 2008, I made the decision to run for an Atlanta City Council seat that was up for election in 2009. And the decision was born really from two kind of internal driving factors. One was I had grown up in a family in which public service was viewed as a means to do good and something worthy of your time. Both my parents were and are very civically active. My father is a political science professor at a local historically black college who had written his PhD dissertation on race and power in Atlanta politics in the early 1970s. So I'd kind of grown up steeped in the idea of public service and politics. But the other factor that really drove me to run was a belief and an aspiration that I'm sure many of you in this room share, that Atlanta's a great city, but it has the potential opportunity to be a remarkable city without peer. And those two things really led me to want to run, and so I did. And I'm often asked, well, how does one start a campaign? How do you get started? What do you do? And in my case, and in most cases, particularly when you have no name recognition like I did, you just start talking to people. So I started going to neighborhood association meetings and business association meetings and weekend festivals, and someone would say, go talk to this person, so I go talk to that person, and they say, go talk to these 5 people, and that's what I did. And you pick up the phone and you call your friends, your family, your colleagues, your former classmates, ask them to volunteer, to spread the word, to introduce you to people, and also hopefully to contribute to your campaign. And so that's what I did. And meeting by meeting, handshake by handshake, conversation by conversation, my campaign grew. And it was a really remarkable experience. I loved every minute of it, even though it was exhausting. I met so many passionate, invested people all over the city who were dedicated to their street, the nearby park, their neighborhood, our city. And it also led to a number of experiences that were both surprising and sometimes funny. I was once at a house party for a number of candidates for various races, and I was introduced to a room of about 50 people by someone who said, Amir, when I saw your name, I thought you were going to show up here with a turban on your head. And I remember thinking to myself, like, not that there's anything wrong with that, but it was a lesson very quickly that when you run for office, it's almost a lesson in how people view you. And how you view yourself is oftentimes not how people view you. I remember there was a well-circulated blog post, kind of flip on a more frivolous note, a well-circulated blog post opining on what hair product I used. But I guess too, the turban and hair product, people were fascinated by my hair or my head. I knocked on a lot of doors. And 2 experiences come to mind. One was I knocked on a door, and a little girl answered the door. She was 5 or 6, and I asked if her parents were home. And she yelled at the back of the house for her dad. Her dad yelled back that he would be out in a minute. And I turned to talk to the girl, and the girl wouldn't respond to me. She just stared at me. Didn't smile, just stared. Which would have been okay if the dad came to the door, but the dad didn't come to the door. And 1 minute turned to 2 minutes, turned to 5 minutes. And I was like, should I leave? Like, what? Like, and she was just staring, like she was just locked in. And her brother was sitting like 10 yards back on the couch, and he was also just like, they were guarding the house. Like, I wasn't even trying to come in. And finally, like 10 minutes later, he shows up, and we have a 20-second conversation, and I go on my way. But that was eclipsed by the time I knocked on a door and entered into a conversation with an elderly woman. And 3 or 4 minutes into the conversation, we're talking about whatever issue she's passionate about. A man who was her junior, and I don't believe was a family member, walked naked from one room to the kitchen behind her, and then a few minutes later walked back, still naked, to the other room. And I consider it one of the great triumphs of my campaign that at no point did I crack a smile like that little girl. I was locked into her, and inside I wanted to laugh so badly, but I didn't. But as 2008 turned to 2009, my campaign gained traction. I had built a fabulous campaign staff of brilliant, creative, dedicated people. Our volunteer corps was selfless and energetic, and we were really reaching a lot of people around the city. The media coverage was increasingly positive. And it was going well enough that in the summer of 2009, I decided to quit my job as a lawyer at a big law firm to run full-time. And it was a scary thing to do, because it was a well-paying job, but also because I had spent almost 5 years practicing, honing a craft that's very difficult to kind of get good at, and I was just starting to get my footing. And it was also scary because I had spent 3 years in law school before that and accumulated all this debt. But it felt like the right thing to do, and it was very liberating and empowering for me. And the campaign itself, for me, was a transition in self-identity. So first I was a lawyer, then I was a lawyer running for public office, and then at some point I just became this candidate who every morning woke up and spent the day talking to people about issues they were passionate about, grappling with possible solutions. And when you do that all day, every day, for day after day after day, it became who I was. And in my mind, I was going to be doing this for the foreseeable future. I knew why I was running. I could articulate it with conviction. And my campaign, I think, reflected that authentically. And it was this really magical moment for me, and I hope all of you have had this experience or will have this experience multiple times throughout your life, where my purpose really met practice. And I was alive in ways I hadn't been in a long time. And so the summer of 2009 goes toward the fall of 2009, and the campaign's firing all cylinders. Our yard signs are popping up all over town. Our fundraising's going great. I had outraised both my opponents by a fairly significant margin. I had 2 opponents in the race, so there were 3 of us in the race. Endorsements started to roll in. The police union, the fire union, the Chamber of Commerce's endorsement arm gave me its highest rating. The money we raised was able to fund a wave of direct mail that I'm sure all of you get come campaign season. And that helped us get in front of voters who we knew were likely to turn out. And so things are going great. And we come up to Election Day in early November, and the feedback we're getting is really positive. And just as you think you get to the finish line moved on us. And by that I mean, in Georgia, if there's 3 or more candidates in a race and nobody gets 50% of the vote, the top 2 vote getters go to a runoff. And so that's what happened in my race. I got about 41, 42% of the vote. My primary opponent got about 46%, 45% of the vote. So he and I campaigned for 1 more month, through November into December. So more phone calls, more meetings, more signs go up, more mailings go out. And so runoff election night comes, and my campaign has an election night party at a restaurant in town. And another great pride of my campaign for me was at that party, and I felt like my campaign really reflected the city. There was probably 75, 100 people at this gathering, and it was multiracial, multi-ethnic, young, old, various professions, men and women. And the energy in that room was amazing. And it wasn't so much for me as it was, these are people who were really just passionate about the possibility of Atlanta and ways to make it better. And it was just a beautiful collection of people who were fired up about the future of the city. And soon election results started to roll in. And at first we fell behind, but it was okay because these were precincts that we thought we were likely to lose. And it was okay until it wasn't okay. And we realized that I wasn't going to win, and I wasn't closing the gap that I had fallen behind by. I ended up getting about 46% of the vote. And although I had thought about losing, I mean, you know it's either you're going to win or you're going to lose, I hadn't prepared for it. And I suppose when you run a campaign, there's no way to, if you're really running it with conviction and from the heart, everything you do is focused on winning. Every handshake, every conversation, every time you ask someone for money, every time you formulate a position on an issue, it's all toward working on something bigger than yourself for much longer than the campaign. Because if you even thought about losing, people wouldn't contribute to you, you would have a hollow sense of purpose. And so I wasn't prepared for it. And I remember at this party, when it kind of set in that I was going to lose, internally, I was kind of grappling with it, because it wasn't so much that I lost, it was that in this moment, the person I thought I wasn't possible anymore. And I remember thinking I should give a concession speech, but I didn't want to. And so instead, I just kind of walked around thanking people for their support and for coming. And people that had looked at me with great enthusiasm and hope now were looking at me with condolences and eyes averted, and people started slowly sneaking out and going home. And at some point, my campaign manager pulled me aside and said, oh, you reminded me I needed to call my opponent, who's a wonderful person and worthy of winning in every way. I needed to call him and congratulate him and concede. And I don't even remember doing this. I assume it happened, but it was just like one hot-faced blur for me. And I went home that night and went to sleep. And the next morning, I got up ready to campaign again, because I'd been doing it. It'd been like almost muscle memory. And I caught myself before I even got out of bed and realized, well, no, that's not for me anymore. It was almost like I'd been madly in love with someone, and then all of a sudden they picked up and walked away without even giving me an opportunity to plead my case, as it were. And I think the hardest part for me in that moment was realizing that everything I'd poured myself into, even though I got a lot out of it, wasn't going to happen. And I didn't have a job to go back to. And I didn't know what I was going to do next. And so for that morning and many mornings that followed, I would wake up and have to catch myself and look in the mirror and be like, I don't know what's next, and I don't know who I am right now, or what my purpose is. And so really for me, there was nothing to do at that point, but at some point I realized the only thing to do was to start over and to learn to see myself in a new way. Thank you.